I invite you now to hear these words from the book of Ecclesiastes. I read the first 9 verses of the book. The words of the teacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the teacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What do people gain from all the toil at which they toil under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hurries to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and it goes around to the north. Round and round goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they continue to flow. All things are wearisome, more than one can express. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, or the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. There is nothing new under the sun. Amen. Well, I've shared with you before that my brother and I went on a backpacking trip this summer up in the Olympic Mountains of Washington State. While we were up there, of course, when we're backpacking, there's always a lot of things to do. And one morning we woke up and we started getting all the camp kind of broken down and ready to go. And one of my tasks was to go and get the water filter and go down to the creek not far from where we stayed and pump the water through the filter so that we could have good fresh water to drink. Well, I ran down there, and when I got there, I was just awestruck by the sight. There was this little creek with a little pool with this fog, this mist that had settled down kind of on top of this area. Kind of like the fog that we saw this morning, right? Many of us, as we got up early enough to see this fog that had just set down on top. And as I sat there, I was just amazed. I wished I had my camera with me. Of course, as somebody who's going on a sabbatical to do photography, you'd think I'd have it a little bit closer, but I went ahead and finished pumping and thought, I'll get the camera and I'll come back and take a picture. Of course, when I got back, I realized, we got to heat up this water, and we got to tear down the tent, and we got all the different things. And what's the kids' book? If you give a mouse a cookie, right? Everything reminded me of another thing to do until finally I strapped my pack on, and I thought, the picture, I got to take the picture. And so I went back down, and of course, you know how the story ends. By the time I got back down there, the fog had lifted. The mist was gone, and my picture wasn't what I had hoped it would be. And so I cursed myself for not being quick enough, or not being committed enough, or not thinking I had to bring my camera, and strapped on my pack and headed off for the next day's hike. Well, I want you to think about that picture, this kind of anecdote, as a way to think about the passage that we read this morning from the book of Ecclesiastes. Vanity, vanity, says the author of Ecclesiastes. All is vanity. Now, this is kind of the catchphrase of the book of Ecclesiastes. We found it in the words that we heard this morning, but then really throughout a lot of the book we hear the same words. And the Hebrew word that we get translated as vanity is actually the word hevel, which is translated, like a lot of Hebrew words, into a lot of different English words. It has a very broad and rich meaning. And so it could be vanity, it could be meaninglessness, which some translations talk about meaningless. Everything is meaningless, right? Absurdity is another good translation. Or my favorite, one of the more poetic ones, is mist, vapor. Just like the vapor that will disappear if you're not quick enough to take the picture. And that's what the author says almost all of life is filled with. Mist, vapor, things that will evaporate before our eyes. Here a minute and then gone, just like a creek bed filled with mist. It's gone. And the moment is gone forever. So he says, most of the things of this world are hevel, meaningless. Relationships, money, success, glory, wisdom, carnal pleasures, all of these different things. These are vapor says the author of Ecclesiastes. They are meaningless. They evaporate and they are gone. So much of the stuff of this world is here for a minute and then gone forever. Or at least until the next day when we chase after it once again. Well, makes for a rather fun book, doesn't it? The book of Ecclesiastes. Kind of an exciting read, isn't it? How many of you all would suggest that the book of Ecclesiastes is easily in your top 3 of your favorite books of the Bible? None? All right. How many would you say maybe in your bottom 3 of the books of the Bible, right? I mean, it's kind of a hard book to read sometimes, isn't it? It's hard to get into, hard to see it because it feels at times as though it's a hopeless book. That there's not a lot of hope to it. I asked the folks at the Two-Way this week, our Wednesday night Bible study, as we studied this passage. I asked them, well, where is the good news in this passage? And I just heard crickets. We got to it, and I'll get to it today, but I think it feels like a lot of the book of Ecclesiastes is just filled with bad news. It's not filled with hope. But let's look a little bit deeper at Ecclesiastes today as the teacher, Koheleth, teaches us. I think part of the reason that this book feels like it's difficult to read, has a difficult message, is because of the messages in our culture around us. Think about how different they are than the message of Ecclesiastes. Think about, health and wealth and money and honor and prestige. These are the things that we're supposed to be after, right? That we're supposed to be excited about. These are the things that bring us happiness, that make life worth living. At least that's what the culture around us tends to tell us. These are the things that are worth our energy, the things that make us happy, and that's what really matters. Are we happy people? At least that's what we hear again and again in our messages. It's even in the Declaration of Independence, right? What is one of the things that we are allowed, that we're supposed to do? We're the pursuit of happiness. That's what we're supposed to be about, and that's what the culture around us teaches us. And that's what the world around us peddles, the right look and the right stuff, the right things, the right job, the right spouse, the right family. Think about all our culture heroes. They're good looking and they're happy and they're smiling and they got all these great people around them. They're laughing and it's just a picture of happiness. And we look at our own lives and say, but it's not mine. A lot of times when I want to see a mirror of the culture around us, I go the same thing that you guys go to, right? To Google. And I typed in, how can I be happy? Trying to find out what the answer is that culture, that Google tells us. Except I couldn't type it all in. As you all probably know, in Google there's an autofill feature that predicts what you are going to type. And as I typed, how can I be, the word happy came up to the top. I wasn't the first to do that search. Our world yearns in what feels to be a broken heart of despair for something else, for happiness. So I clicked on that, and of course all of the first results were amazing. The first 10 results were almost exactly the same. There were different lists for how you can become a happier person. 10 things that you can be happier. 23 scientifically proven ways to be a happier person. 15 things that happy people do. Habits of happy people, right? All of these different lists. The number was different, but the lists were all basically about the same. All of them boiled down to a way that we could go to this pursuit of happiness in just a few short tasks. And all of a sudden, we're happy. But I want to push back on the idea that is the task of us as Christians, as people of faith. Is it really our task in life to be quote-unquote happy, whatever that means? Now, before I do that, I do want to make a point, an important distinction. What I'm not talking about here is a real challenge for a lot of us, and that is a significant clinical depression. What I don't want to do is simplify or oversimplify folks who are dealing with something that's going on clinically and chemically kind of wired in their brains, and this is not simply something that we could just talk about it and make it go away, right? There's some, again, very chemical responses, a lot of times long-term emotional counseling responses that are required to deal with that kind of clinical depression. I'm not trying to slough off folks that are dealing with that kind of level of clinical depression. But I think for a lot of us, the problem is probably not that complex in our minds and what's going on in our own synapses. My guess is we're simply trying to make sense of what the world around is telling us to do and comparing that to what's really going on in our hearts. They tell us all you have to do is these 15 things to be happy, and we do it, and it's like it's not working. What's wrong? And so let me ask a question today. Let's do a thought experiment. What if our task as a people of faith, our task as Christians, were not to pursue happiness? Now let me make it clear. I did not say our task is to pursue unhappiness. I think there are probably some Christians out there that try to do that. That's not what I'm after. I instead believe that we may need to ask the question, what if we're not about this pursuit of happiness as our be-all, end-all, ultimate goal? What if we rejected that as a premise of how we're supposed to live our lives? What if there was something going on in the world? That's the thought experiment that I believe is the book of Ecclesiastes. The author asks and answers that question over the course of several chapters. And I would offer that there may be a way to read Ecclesiastes that is not hopeless, that in fact gives us a more profound hope than 15 easy habits to make life happy. Let me suggest that the author is incredibly hopeful in his assessment of the world, but that assessment is a very realistic one. What he's doing is he's flipping the goal from happiness to something else. You see, according to the author, the pursuit of happiness is actually a fool's errand. It cannot be done. Ironically, when we try, that's what gets in the way of our actual happiness. It is the trying to accomplish and succeed and triumph and possess and follow 10 easy steps to happiness that leads us to a life of meaninglessness. Now, all of this is a little jarring, not only because of the cultural codes that we receive again and again, but also because of, the sermon I preached last week. Right? Remember last week I talked about awe. I talked about all the beauty we see around us, and we can kind of find these benchmarks of beauty, these benchmarks of things that inspire us, that we should have gratitude in our heart for. But I think there's a second side of the coin, a second part of this equation, and it is the fact that the author of Ecclesiastes asks this. He says, well, what if all of those things that used to bring you awe failed? Your family members turn against you. Your riches fail to bring you happiness. Beauty fades. The way of worldly wisdom fails to make you a happy person. Hard for me to say it, but even sometimes you show up to church and it's not doing it for you anymore. Even nature fails to bring you to that place of awe. That's what we read in that first chapter. All of the beauty around the author, and still didn't mean awe. You fail to experience that awe that you once did, and according to the author of Ecclesiastes, when you reach that point that all of those different things that used to do it, that used to bring you to this place of rapture and place of beauty, as soon as you get to that place of realizing that none of those things is doing it for you anymore, that's when you're ready to see God. According to that moment, that point of realizing that those things, all of those things at some level are vanity, are meaningless, are hevel, are mist. Disappearing as the day grows longer. And so we hear these words. A little bit later down in the book of Ecclesiastes. Here in the 8th chapter, we read this. When I applied my mind to know wisdom, and to see the business that is done on earth, how one's eyes see sleep, neither day nor night, and then I saw all the work of God, that no one can find out what is happening under the sun. It is according to the author of Ecclesiastes that it's this pursuit of happiness that actually gets in the way of it. Chasing after those good feelings with those 10 easy steps. It's a fool's errand, like a dog chasing its own tail around and around and around. It simply doesn't work. That never-ending pursuit of happiness actually brings us despair. But that's not the end of the story or even the end of the passage. The author has an answer of what we should do next. However, much they may toil in seeking, they will not find it out, even though those who are wise claim to know, they cannot find it out. So what is the answer? Stop trying so hard. They cannot find it out. The never-ending pursuit of happiness actually brings despair. You're not going to be able to completely understand God, to completely see God, to completely know God, to completely hear God, to completely understand the awesomeness of God. For this teacher, that right there is the good news. That when you come to this place where you stop trying to figure out that God is here or God is here, is this God? I don't know, I can't tell. When you stop that worry, then you can start to see God everywhere. In other words, there's a time when you come to this place where you recognize in the silence, in the space, even in the meaninglessness, that God is there. When you cease your eternal striving for perfect peace of mind and the perfect job and the perfect family and the perfect church and the perfect way to understand God, when you acknowledge your own limitation and understand you're not going to figure it out, that's where God is. God shows up, just like God does at the end of Job. After 38 chapters of endless striving, just like God does in the belly of the whale after a race away from Nineveh, just like God does in the Garden of Gethsemane. In the places where our searching ends, God is there. So many people of faith have come to this conclusion, the same idea as the author of Ecclesiastes, including the author that I referenced a lot last week, Annie Dillard. She talked a lot about the awe that we see in the natural world. We talked about the intricacy and the exquisiteness and the goldfish scales and the caterpillar heads and all of that kind of stuff. That's the first half of her book, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. But then in the second half, she takes a very different approach. All of a sudden, she starts talking about all of the destruction in nature and talks about how animals kill each other and how there's a lot of disease and there's violence there in the middle of nature. And by the end of the book, she's come to the place where you start to wonder, well, does she see God in nature at all? But that's the point. She sees God in both sides of this coin. She wrote later, many years later, about what she had in mind. Indeed, the book is written in two parts. The first part is about that awe and that pizzazz, she says, that the Creator has. God's fingerprints all over it. But then in the second half of the book, she writes about what she calls the via negativa, or the negative way. It's an ancient tradition of Christian thinkers and philosophers who have found that God is not always found in the things, in the mountaintops, in the high points of the world, but also in the absence of those things, in the space, in the silence, in the darkness, in the emptiness, even in the meaninglessness. And so for Dillard, this is just as profound a realization that God is in the beauty and the amazing, awe-inspiring moments. She says it this way. She says, anything we may say of God is untrue, as we can only know creaturely attributes which do not apply to God. Thinkers on the via negativa jettisoned everything that was not God. They hoped that what would be left would only be the divine dark. So instead of pursuing all of the things to say, well, that's got to be God, and that's got to, instead saying, look, I can name some things in the brokenness of the world, but yet God is here. And so our response is silence, is to just be in the presence of God. How many of y'all know the hymn, Let All Mortal Flesh Keep Silence? We often sing it at Christmas time because it talks about Mary and it's got some good kind of incarnational language in there. But it's also this fascinating hymn, this song that was written probably just about 275 years after the time of Christ. So it's this ancient hymn, and what it does is it talks about this need to be silent in the presence of God. It says this in the first verse, let all mortal flesh keep silence, and with fear and trembling stand. Ponder nothing earthly minded, for with blessing in his hand, Christ our God to earth descending comes our homage to demand. What is our moment of worship, even in the meaninglessness? It is silence. It is space. And then another 1,200 years later, another Christian writer made the same point. Perhaps you've heard of St. John of the Cross, a Carmelite monk, one who wrote about a lot of different kind of Christian ideas, Christian theologies, Christian philosophies. He was a teacher and a theologian. And he came to a lot of the same conclusions that Dillard did later, and then this author of this hymn did much earlier. He wrote about what he called the dark night of the soul. And according to this concept, John said it was natural for a Christian to come to the point where practices of awe, right, mountaintop to mountaintop to mountaintop, all of a sudden become empty, become dry. Even the things that we do, our prayers, our scripture readings, even coming to church and singing songs, our worship, all of these things stop being as meaningful as they once were. He says it this way. He says, this is where God weans us from all the pleasures by giving us dry times and inward darkness. Sounds a little depressing, right? But this is good news to John, because we don't have to spend all of our time pursuing the next big thing, but to wait in silence, in the space, and then we see God, not only in the big and the bold, but as the ever-present ground of being who surrounds us. So Dillard and the author of Immortal Flesh and St. John on the Cross are all saying the same thing. Stop chasing what you think will make you happy, whatever that means. Start waiting in silence. Respect the space. Sits in the presence of the one who brings you true fulfillment, true harmony, true peace. Well, that morning I did not quite get that lesson. As I stood there in the Olympic mountains, I was ready for the next big thing. And really for a lot of my trip, a lot of my sabbatical, that's what I was doing. I was hopping to the next big thing. Well, I'll take a picture of this, and look, I'll take a picture of this, and look, this is another pretty thing. And throughout all of those moments, I hopped and I hopped and I hopped looking for the next fix, the next awe. But what if I had that morning sat down again and asked, well, how is God still here? Not on the fog, not on the mist. That has dissipated, that is gone, but there is yet beauty here. And even if there wasn't, there is yet God here. That's what the author of Ecclesiastes is trying to teach us. Don't go yearning and searching when you know God is the ground of being. So one of the ways that I started to learn this lesson a little bit better was not only reading Dillard and Ecclesiastes, but also doing some photographic assignments. I was assigned by a couple of different books I read to take a picture of space. Not just like, stars and moon, and not space there, but space, the concept of space. And it's harder than you might think, right? We're used to taking pictures of things. We're used to going to the next pretty thing, right? That's what we're used to taking pictures of. We're used to taking a picture of a thing on a background. What if we took pictures of the background as the thing? It's not an easy thing to do. But I gave it a shot, and I took some pictures of space, or at least what felt like space. Emptiness. Void. And as I began to explore this idea just a little bit more in depth, it began to dawn on me that in these places as well, God is here. God is present. God is the ground of being, has not left the building. Instead, that space taught me to wait. Like John, to be patient, to see it as an opportunity to ask, what is God doing with me now? During those times of dryness, during those times of meaninglessness, maybe God is using that to teach. And so I read one more section from Dillard. This is from a book that she wrote a few years after Tinker Creek, Teaching a Stone to Talk. And in it, she gives us our final words today of the importance of silence. I have a taste for solitude, she writes, and silence, and for what Plantius called the flight of the alone to the alone. I have a taste for solitude. You walk, and one day you enter the spread heart of silence, where lands dissolve and seas become vapor and ices sublime under unknown stars. This is the end of the via negativa, the lightless edge where the slopes of knowledge dwindle, and love for its own sake, lacking an object, begins. That is the love that comes to us. May we experience in the silence what that love does to us. Let us pray. O Lord, hear our prayers. Amen.